Many around the world celebrated what is known as Epiphany, sometimes called Three Kings Day and known also as Theophany. For some, it's the day that three kings or wise men who had marched across vast lands following a star arrived at their destination and offered gifts to the baby Jesus. For some, it actually marks the baptism of Jesus in the Jordan River. Whichever of those particular moments it commemorates, it is understood by Christians who celebrate it as the moment of theophany, of God made known, the moment when Jesus is revealed as God incarnate, the moment of physical manifestation of the divine in a human. It's called Epiphany because that word derives from the Greek for manifestation or appearance. Of course, in English, beyond using it to speak about this particular feast day, we use the word epiphany to mean a moment of sudden revelation or insight. Sudden revelation, unexpected insight. If you remember the story of the three kings as it's told in tradition, they follow a star. They're wise men looking for signs, seers interpreting the movements of the heavens, and they see this strange thing up in the night sky and they chase it down to its origin. The Epiphany is like any other epiphany. There's something about our frame of mind, how we approach the world, where we put our focus, our level of openness that impacts our ability to experience a sudden revelation or unexpected insight. Early this fall, we collectively got back to a semblance of life before. Congregations meeting in person, schools reopened close to in fullness, and so much more, albeit with restrictions and protocols that, though we are getting used to them, remain frustrating or saddening for many. And as we have made these returns, after a year and a half of significantly altered living, I have been thinking a lot about focus, about attention, about busyness. For a year and a half in the depths of the pandemic, so much of our mental and even physical energy went into trying to stay connected in new ways, into trying to get ourselves and our family what they needed to meet basic physical and mental and emotional needs, and went into trying to literally stay alive, even as we mourned almost nonstop all the losses of lives and livelihoods and lifestyles. This summer and fall, we have tried to relearn or learn anew ways of being in the world. I watched as one of my children really struggled to get back to school. His fear of COVID had become ingrained in a way my other children hadn't experienced. Unmasking for lunch, sitting within 6 feet of peers, all of it was harder than he could stand at first. And I watched as many of my colleagues and I had to rethink how we worked, what we spent our time on, where our energy came from, especially if we were continuing to be responsible for parents or children or partners who were at greater risk, even as the pandemic eased a bit. I watched as many of you navigated shifting back to in-person working or figuring out the balance between remote work and homework, all while doing constant risk-reward analyses about each and every way you reclaimed old behaviors, like travel or dining out or seeing your loved ones. The shifting of our focus from basic needs like survival, food, toilet paper, and the fundamentals of our work into something else this summer and fall has been and remains challenging. Because it's also true, as evidenced by the last few weeks, that this version of normalcy is tenuous. We are acutely aware of this in ways we weren't pre-pandemic. We aren't out of the woods, and any choice we make might need to be rethought at any moment. In this relearning, in this adjusting and figuring out what it means to live with a level of uncertainty we don't love, there is a very big and important question about time and how we use it. I remember so many people couldn't read for long periods during the pandemic, like just couldn't get through a book, couldn't focus enough to do that. And many of us binged television like never before, spending hours that we could have been reading or working or sleeping, watching TV instead. Many of us spent a lot of time scrolling through social media feeds. And in many ways, all of that technology that has allowed us some solace, some escape, some connection has been absolutely vital in this time. When I think about what the last 2 years would have been like without it, I kind of shudder to think about what it might have been like. And still there are those who lament, and I suspect they are not entirely wrong, that social media, the internet, the constant gratification of on-demand entertainment is part of a larger cultural shift in how we use our focus and our time that is impacting our mental and emotional and social capabilities. Very recently, The Guardian published a piece that is a snippet of a larger book written by Johann Hari. The book, published just this past Wednesday, is titled "Stolen Focus: Why You Can't Pay Attention." The short form piece in The Guardian was titled "Your Attention Didn't Collapse, It Was Stolen." Hari, an author who spent 3 years researching attention after feeling that his own was deteriorating, contends that in addition to the internet, there are many factors that have been changing how we focus. He writes, quote, "From the food we eat to the air we breathe, from the hours we work to the hours we no longer sleep, from how we deprive our children of play to how our schools strip learning of meaning by basing everything on tests, we have been changed." He sees a vast network of societal missteps that are depleting our capacity for attention and focus. Missteps that can be corrected only in part by individual changes, and that require true widespread cultural change in order for our brains to heal. We have the capacity to gain back our mental power, he writes, in the face of all these manifest challenges to our acuity, but we need to fight for it, for our attentional health. Hari acknowledges that, quote, "Some scientists say these worries about attention are a moral panic, comparable to the anxieties in the past about comic books or rap music, and that the evidence is shaky. Other scientists say the evidence is strong, and these anxieties are like the early warnings about the climate crisis in the 1970s. But he argues, regardless of which set of scientists are right, it would hurt nothing and only help if we were to reform certain things, like what we consider the length of a workday and how we behave about constant access to employees and work communication, or how we treat play in education, or how social media is contained or not and structured. We might as well attempt, he says, to make individual and collective changes, because why not? And the risk in not doing it is high, he says, because, quote, "The more our attention degrades, the harder it will be to summon the personal and political energy to take on the forces stealing our focus." What he's saying is, if we don't do something about our attentional health, we will end up lacking the focus to make change, and we will have slipped into a place from which we cannot come back. A couple of times this fall, loved ones have noted my ability to pay attention to multiple things at once. For example, I can listen to one child and still hear the conversation my friends are having and jump in periodically. It's true, I can do it. I can be aware of one child playing across the playground and the one chatting right in my ear next to me, and still be aware that my parents are having an interesting chat about politics. It is not a skill unique to me, but one that I think parents of multiple children develop over time. Slowly, over the last 6 years, it has become almost a survival skill. And I was struck deeply by a certain passage in Johann Hari's article that talks about all that is lost when we pay attention to more than one thing at once. He quotes an MIT neuroscientist, Earl Miller, in explaining what's called the switch cost effect. The idea is that every time you switch between one topic and another, one task and another, you are not only losing the literal time in which you are focused on task B instead of A, but you are losing extra time as your brain attempts to reconfigure, to shift between one thing and another. What struck a nerve with me was exactly this articulation of loss when we split our attention. I know for moments when I'm able to devote myself single-mindedly, and these moments are few and far between, that something different is possible than when I feel pulled in a bunch of different directions at once. Any of us who've worked from home with partners or children around know that this is true. Deeper relationship is possible. Greater clarity of thought happens. We can enter what scientists call the flow state when we can actually focus on one thing. So I can focus on three things at once, but something is lost. It comes at a cost. The flow state is that feeling of losing a sense of time and place as you become so focused in something. And Hari notes that flow requires certain things. You need one goal that's meaningful to you, and that goal has to be a bit beyond your normal reach. Flow, creativity, imagination, and from all of that, epiphanies that can change the world are hard to come by in a time of chaos and crisis, hard to come by in a time when attention and focus are spread thin. Between our culture and our current circumstances, I found myself wondering this week what stars in the sky had gone unnoticed. And how do we cultivate a new or perhaps old openness to unexpected insight and sudden revelation? As I was thinking about this Sunday's sermon and juggling, trying to figure out if my children will go back to in-person school on Monday, I was struck by how much easier flow is, how much easier writing is, how much easier all kinds of work is when you are juggling less. Johann Hari describes renting a little house in Provincetown to try and recover his attention and focus. There, alone, he writes for a month. Male ministers of the 19th and 20th centuries almost inevitably had wives who were cooking, cleaning, raising the children, managing the church's social events and pastoral care, so the minister could focus and achieve flow on sermons and newsletters regularly. There are so many ways that our structural systems, our social systems, have been built around certain privileges of gender and race and wealth. Not everyone can rent a house in Provincetown for a month, put everything else away, and write. To this day, our systems and structures make it so much harder for women, people of color, LGBT folks, poor folks, and active caregivers to attend and focus in the ways Hari wants us all to. If you're having to be constantly vigilant about your physical safety, focus and flow can feel unsafe. If you're having to spend mental energy on organizing others' lives, having anything left with which to focus on your own generative work can be challenging. If you're continuously undermined or viewed as lesser, then having space to feel supported and purposeful in your own flow can feel impossible. If you're just fighting to survive, carving out time to focus on the sky is not front of mind. And for all of us, we have labored quite literally for so long under the American Protestant cultural myths of productivity and meritocracy and competition that we have forgotten that being busy is not necessarily virtuous, that it certainly isn't something we can win at. And it made me think of that line in Adrienne Marie Brown's work, Not Busy Focused, Not Busy Full, that line in which she writes, "Now my body aches to remember when I was busy, when I was so capitalist in my anti-capitalism, that is to say, productive in my revolutionary performance." We've made a habit of being busy, which is perhaps one of the most insidious ways that our attention and focus have been stolen, though Hari doesn't mention that in the short piece. Yes, technology has given us more to look at and scroll through and be instantly gratified by, but our desire for that, our training for that comes even earlier than our access to that technology. It comes when we overschedule children and overtax them with homework in order to prepare them to be overworked adults that constantly produce, as if human value were only in the creation of goods and wealth, as parts of the machinery of capitalism. Brown's poem offers a different vision, not one necessarily panicked specifically about social media, but one that does seem to agree that something is broken in how we use our time, attention, and focus. If even those fighting the system are caught in the system's busyness culture, a tool of oppression itself, then we are going to be hard-pressed to change the system. Resisting the urge to be busy, that is a revolutionary act. Taking time to put away the phone, be inaccessible, focus on one thing at a time, that is a revolutionary act. And it is also an act of kindness and compassion, not just to ourselves, but to everyone. The wise men who saw a star, they were able to focus, put everything away, watch the sky day and night, and then take weeks or months to leave their lives in order to follow it. That's a heck of a lot of flow. And presumably they had servants, folks all around them making sure they could watch that sky. Someone else was mucking the stalls and making the meals. I realize it is a privilege then and now to be able to focus on one thing for long stretches. And the basic security that we all need to do that is something that we should fight for as a right, not a privilege. At this stage of human social evolution, we should not need to be fighting for survival as individuals, pitted against each other in a system of wealth inequality and scarcity that causes us to collectively lose huge amounts of creativity and imaginative brain power to survival mode that prevents generative work. We should not need to apply technology as a salve to our broken system. We should be able to employ it to reform the system and create something new in which each and every person has the space and time to say, as Brown does, I am not busy. No, with all these boundaries, I have space to write, to take care of my body, to hold my loves tightly in my many, many hands. And we fight for this time and space by beginning to reform our own way of being in the world, and by remembering what it is like to not be so busy, to not be so pulled between a million things at once, just like Brown. We begin by refusing to tell the story that we are busy. I know so many people who say this as a point of pride or proof or explanation. It begins, I think, with stopping first the need to explain why we choose to do a thing or not do a thing. I don't need to be busy to say no. I can simply say no because I don't want to do it. We're allowed to have boundaries without explanation. That realization is liberatory and it is liberating. It helps us all get free from the oppression of busyness as excuse. And then we need to stop justifying our existence. What if instead of, I'm busy, see, I work hard, I matter, I have worth because I'm working, I'm busy. What if instead we offered, hey, life is complicated and exciting and terrifying, and I am seeking, I'm living, I'm loving, I'm growing, I'm full, I'm focused. Or even better, perhaps, what if we simply said, I am, and that is enough? Getting us out of that oppression of busyness as justification for existing. When our peers around us do that thing where they complain, brag about how much they work, you all know what this sounds like, how early they go in, how many hours they put in, how little time they have for their families or themselves. When we do that thing, when people around us do that thing, we're hurting ourselves, but we're also perpetuating a system where our worth is defined by our busyness, where our productivity is a measure of our humanity. And so it's not only for our own sake, but for those around us as well, that we have to resist the urge to be busy. If we make space to take care of ourselves and we normalize that in speech and deed, It allows others the space to do the same. If we can remember that spaciousness, calm, focus, and flow are basic human needs and desires that offer us a depth of living we are built for, a depth of living we crave, then we can shift our cultural notion that these are privileges and create a world in which we understand them as rights. Changing a lifetime of habit isn't easy. Small steps are important. We need to keep looking up at the sky, putting away the phone for a time, giving ourselves freedom to care for ourselves, altering the way we speak about our own lives and our worth, supporting each other in all these changes, and ultimately being gentle with ourselves as we navigate shifting waters and trying times. All these subtle alterations will help each of us and all of us. Wherever the pandemic takes us, what I don't want is to go back to the feeling of being constantly busy. Brown ends her poem writing, "I hope to never be busy again. I owe this quiet breath to my grandmother. I am creating at an astounding rate, and some of it I even write down. Some moments I get so still I can sense how it is all connected and that the tissue is love. And I know my love could never be wasted or too small a contribution. I say yes when love leads." May we have the space to breathe, honoring the generations who helped carve out that space for us. May we create and let some of it be lost to the ether, aware that the act of creating is more important than the product itself. May we know our love as a gift that is never wasted, that sustains the world and all of us. May we know our love as an epic contribution to the human story. And may we say yes with boundaries and care when love leads us to. So may it be.